Mark was diagnosed with motor neuron disease, or more commonly known as amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS for short, also known as Lou Gehrig disease. Motor neuron disease is considered a progressive neurodegenerative disease that affects the motor neurons in the brain and the spinal cord. Motor neuron disease can affect the upper neurons, the lower neurons, or even both. The upper motor neurons being in the brain and the lower motor neurons being in the spinal cord. Motor neuron disease affects a person's ability to voluntarily move. Normally a motor neuron would start from the brain, travel to the spinal cord, and then cause the muscles to move. Motor neuron effects commonly begin with muscle weakness and twitching of the hands or feet. As the nerve cells degenerate further, it purses the muscles, causing atrophy, and eventually causing paralysis. Mark was diagnosed with motor neuron disease shortly after a motorcycle incident, and sometime after this, his friend Chris took him in. This documentary is a memorialization of Mark and his battle for independence with motor neuron disease.
Came to initially meet Mark through a colleague at work that I gave a few lifts home from when he didn't have transport, and met Mark through him, and we hit it off and just became mates from there on.
In your best words, can you describe to me Mark's personality?
Mark's personality was, he had a wicked sense of humour.
Yeah.
Very down to earth. Probably sounds rather cliche, but no, he was just a very real person. Whether that was the illness or what, and in limited time he just had no time for bullshit, fake people, fake promises, you know.
Yeah.
Time was a valuable commodity to him.
So, would you say the two of you shared any similarities?
Yes and no. I've had my own health issues and struggles. That gave me a small insight into some of his challenges that he faced, but nowhere near the enormity of what confronted Mark on a daily basis. But in a way, we both drew sort of strength from each other and was able to help each other through some rough times and things, in spite of our own illnesses and all that. He was a man that didn't complain a great deal. He'd often look toward, you know, there's other people worse off, he'd commonly say, you know.
Did Mark influence you in any way?
Mark, I don't know about influenced me, but it certainly reminded me that we've all got a finite amount of time, and no matter how many material things and much money in the bank we've got, when it all comes down to it, it's family and spending time and things that mean the most.
Could you tell me any story that characterizes his personality, or maybe something he did commonly, or a habit or hobby?
He used to enjoy and love fishing, and which we would do little trips fairly regularly, but they became less and less as his motor skills and became harder to hold a fishing rod and reel it in, and even the casting. He'd have to work. He had his own little way of doing things. He'd think outside the square, and he wouldn't let something beat him until he'd given it the best crack he could. But he managed to get the bait in the water and chuck it in. Might not have looked pretty or the regular way to do it, but he did it. He did it his way.
And, well, initially in the events, what caused you to accommodate Mark, / how did it come about?
Came about Mark living here. He had split up with his girlfriend, who was living in a camper van at that stage and just travelling around, visiting places, and needed somewhere to stay temporarily for a few days before he moved on to visit the next place around Tasmania. He filled in big chunks of his time while he could drive, just playing the tourist in Tassie, just travelling around and checking out places and doing things at his leisure. And then after that, after a while, the camper van got a bit small, and he needed to get something more substantial, but he didn't want to be a burden to anybody or anything. And I invited him to bring his van out and spend his time out here.
Here in these photos, you can see the caravan in which Mark lived in on the property. Here is where Mark slept and spent most of his time. He also had a bed in the caravan, but he found it hard to sleep when lying down, so he found it easier to sleep in an upright, comfortable position.
Did he have any pets at the time?
When he was with his last girlfriend, he had a dog called Prince. But, and then over the years, he's had various dogs as well. And he was an animal lover and an avid bird lover. We'd quite often be sitting out the front looking across towards Windermere on the river and stuff, and I used to call him Hawkeye. He would spot things a mile away. Yeah. But no, he loved the birds and the bird life and things.
Being such short notice of having such a short time frame, do you think he learned any wise or valuable life lessons?
In the end, money doesn't mean much. Things don't mean much. It's love, family, spending time.
Do you think you might look at your life differently now than before you decided to take in Mark?
Well, as I said earlier, I've learned to appreciate each day with a renewed outlook and appreciation. I'll forever miss Mark. He was an inspiring man, and like I said, in some of my darkest days when I was quite ill, he lifted me up and kept me going. And over the time, I was just very happy to repay the favour to him, and in turn look after him in a way. And
what might have been some of the things that you might have learnt from Mark, / what might have been the most important thing?
Make time for family. Tell them you love them. Show them you love them. Yeah. Don't get caught up in materialism.
That's a good one. And has this chapter of your life, would you consider it to have changed you, or what would you consider you have learned?
I certainly feel I'm a better person for knowing Mark, and having spent time with him, been able to help him live out his last days how he wanted on his terms, and to have provided that opportunity to him. His greatest fear was to end up in 24-hour care in a hospital bed, unable to do anything for him, unable to speak, but just lay there like a vegetable and waste away. That was something he never wanted. That was one of his fear. His fear wasn't in dying. His fear was the lead up to dying and not being in control. And the way everything worked out, he passed away peacefully in his sleep, and couldn't really ask for much more.
As Mark's motor neuron began to hinder his motor skills, he had a few apparatuses which enabled him to help prolong his independence and make things a bit more comfortable. You can see here how Mark has bent the spoon to help him continue to eat properly as he began to lose function in his arms, wrists and hands. Also note how the cutlery has a larger handle than the usual spoon displayed to make it a lot easier for Mark to be able to hold. In these next images, you can see the prosthetic Mark got to help straighten and continue his use of his lower arms, and a little finger prosthetic in which he used to prevent his fingers from curling back into the palms of his hands. and his nails digging into his palms, both helping him keep his independence intact to the best of his ability, and also keeping his health in check by still being able to drink fluids and eat food. Though, as the motor neuron progressed further, Mark did begin to find it hard to swallow food down.
Can you think about anything else about Mark, or even something of his past?
Well, Mark had a colourful past. We talked quite a lot about when he was in Queensland. He was a truck driving, and his fishing trips, be it out in the rivers or lakes or out in the ocean. He loved his fast muscle cars and bikes and things. He spent a short few years with a bikie club and that, and he enjoyed that experience and that brotherhood and all that. But in saying that, after he was diagnosed, and a number of so-called friends and all that just dropped away. It became a bit too hard for them, I suppose. It can be quite confronting, and not everyone sort of deals with it the same way, I guess. But no, Mark's, so he spent time with the bikies, and then after he was diagnosed, his view on life and attitude and things changed, and in a lot of ways I suppose he tried to make the best of what time he had left, and look after those close to his heart, his family and boys and everything, and do the best he could with what he had.
Is there any specific thing, or how would you like Mark to be remembered?
Well, he was a man with a great outlook on life. He didn't go, can't do that. No such thing. He would attack something from so many different angles and thinking so far out the box sometimes. But 90% of the time he got the job done and achieved what he was trying to do. And his incessant determination is one of the most determined people I've ever seen, and also he very rarely complained about pain or aches or feeling crap. Even though you could look at him and you could tell he was. You could see him wincing in pain at times, but he didn't complain about it. You know.
Well, thank you for your time for the interview, and it's good to see you're feeling well.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about Mark and share some of his experience and my experience in knowing Mark. Thank you.
Mark was a blessing chapter in both our lives, and everybody he had touched. Though he may be gone, he still managed to keep his independence right to the very end, and his strength and determination in never giving in to motor neuron was both admirable and courageous, given the impending countdown and deterioration which he gradually suffered from more and more on a daily basis. He still found ways to do what he loved, even if it became harder and the options slim to drinking a lot of iced coffee and maybe a bit of McDonald's. I believe Mark took advantage of the time he had and showed me a deeper and more useful meaning to the phrase, "You only live once." And I hope that throughout this documentary, you are able to as well. Thank you for watching.